Fame. One player might consider this the whole purpose of RotMG. You might be one of those players saving up for when Deca releases the items buyable with Fame and Nexus. Either way, it's one of the foundations that lay the gameplay of RotMG. And through the years, the players of RotMG have attempted to gain Fame faster or in smarter ways. And one might consider, what is the quickest way of gaining Fame in Realm of the Mad God? So before answering this question, I quickly gotta clarify, what is XP? How much XP do you need for base Fame? And the weird chart that is leveling up and getting Fame. So before any of the calculations, we gotta figure out where to start. When leveling up in RotMG, you need a certain amount of XP to level up to the next level. Monsters' XP gain will also change according to your level. For instance, if you're level 1, a monster in the Godlands will only give you 5 XP. And when you've played this game enough, you might start to realize that the Fame gain is changing according to the amount of Fame that you have. And the reasoning for this is because the XP is split up in different sections. Section 1 is level 1 to 20 base Fame, Section 2 is to 50, and so on and so on. You will see it on this chart. This graph also goes to show how easy it is to get Fame up until 218 Fame. And we will be basing all the calculations according to that measurement, which is the basic fact that 1 Fame equals 2000 XP, since most players farming for Fame are probably above 218 base Fame. So with that out of the way, let's move to the dungeons. So the most reasonable thing to start off doing is figuring out which dungeons are probably not one of those to give you the most Fame. And sadly enough, I'm gonna have to remove the low tier dungeons, including the Pirate Cave. Now what we're left with is a huge chunk of middle tier dungeons. And at this point I really want to make assumptions, because I know that there's certain dungeons that give a lot of Fame. And to avoid me trying to research for every single dungeon in this game, I will pick out the few tops that I think gives the most Fame by experience and previous runs. So to create a picture of the entire dungeon, I know that it's not entirely accurate, but it is to represent an image of how much Fame or XP you will gain from this dungeon. I will put together the total XP of all the separate minions together, plus the boss. You know, instead of all the minions, I think I will put the top 5 highest XP minions in the dungeon, plus the boss. So this is as accurate as it gets statistically, since it's almost impossible to predict the monster spawn rate and the specific dungeon layout. So as you can see, I put this document together to show how much XP you at least gain from each of these dungeons, with the calculations that I mentioned before. To start off with, the dungeons that I left out is the Machine, the Sprite World, Cape of 1,000 Treasures, Beach Zone, Special Event Dungeons, Mini Dungeons, and Oryx Castle plus Janus Court. I also left out the Lost Halls and Shatters, but that was on purpose, since I'll be doing literal tests on those dungeons later on. At first we can leave out some of these dungeons that we know there's nothing to go for, at least. In the Magic Woods, I actually calculated in 3 of each of the 5 highest XP minions, because there's so many of those small butterflies, and it's still below 2000 XP. We can also remove the Candyland, since that's pretty bad. Basically almost every dungeon in the Godlands. All the dungeons with 3 asterisks is because I didn't include the Troon, because it's not guaranteed. So you might see all these pretty decent dungeons. They give normal amounts of Fame. I left all the documents that I use in this video in the description if you want to check them out yourself. So in the cemetery I did something special, since you can expect more XP, since there's a lot of minions for each of these rounds. So I did the calculations on the same way I did with all the other dungeons, and that was 4,775. But as you know, there's a lot of stages and there's different spawns of minions with different amounts of Fame, so I made an estimate and calculated it all for all these rounds, and I got 22,520 XP, which is the highest of the low bowlers, because there's some really high ones up there. As soon as you start getting down to the Parasite, you see there's 47,000 total Fame. This is also one of the dungeons that I expected to have the most amount of Fame. Let's continue, and you can see that the Lair of Draconis has the most stable amount of Fame gain, since the only things giving XP is the bosses, and there's 5 of them and they give the same amount each time. Moving into the epic dungeons, they are circling around at 5,000 XP, but I'm not sure that is very accurate, since on RealmI they mentioned that the monsters give weirdly low XP gains, which I think is inaccurate. Either way, it doesn't really change much. Ocean Trench is up there. Ice Cave after the update it received, it got much better. Tomb of the Ancients is also alright, but it's nothing compared to these ones. We have the Nest, which is 57,890 XP. And that's also due to the boss giving 50,000 alone. The heroic Undead Lair is up there. I think it's above 50,000 XP since it was purely an estimate. There's almost no data on REWORKS about the XP that you gain from the monsters. Later in this video, I will attempt to get in one of these dungeons and try to record the fame gain that I get. And last off, we have the Oryx Chamber plus the Vine Cellar. The minions give close to no XP at all, but Oryx himself gives 10,000, which is 5 fame, and Oryx 2 gives 40,000, which is 20 fame. So what we're left with is the Parasite Chambers, the Nest, the Shatters, Lost Halls, Heroic Undead Lair, and the Vine Cellar plus Oryx Chamber. But first, I'll do a Godlands farming test. Please bear in mind that this is a one-man army. I'm not doing a fame train because there's no such thing anymore. I'll be doing this on my night and it's for 5 minutes. Now let's make a hypothesis. So, on average, each of the gods give about 125 XP. And it takes me... That's 1 second for each god, but let's add 2 seconds just in case. That's 20 gods a minute, 105 minutes, and about 12,500 XP. That should be around 6 fame, but the results? I actually gained around 12 fame, but that's mostly due to god walls and all that. And no, I'll not be testing the Middlelands, since that's completely stupid. So we can leave out the Godlands as a possibility. Here we run into a problem, because are we going to count the bosses in the dungeons with or without? Since it depends on which 5 minutes of the dungeon you do. If you do 5 minutes in the end of the Lost Halls, you will gain 50 fame because you killed the Void. But if you do it in the halls, you get the fame from all these small minions. Which is why I will be doing it on the minions first. And then afterwards we can compare the two numbers to each other and add the bosses to see if it actually makes a difference. And when we've made that calculation, we can finally see which way is the most efficient way of getting fame. We're in the end game now. So I will do these dungeons in the same way that you would do them if you're farming fame, which is in a group, with the Shatters as our first bullet point. So I couldn't really do the same calculation as I did with the other dungeons, which is taking the top minions with XP, since the Shatters has some pretty high XP enemies. And it really varies a lot throughout the dungeon how much fame you get from these monsters, because it's not the same amount of monsters that will appear every single dungeon. You get most of your fame from the bosses, with the first one giving you 2 fame, second one also giving you 2 fame, and final boss 10 fame. The fame in between, though, was hard to record since my group lava walked, so I had to take a section of gameplay and amp it up to about 5 minutes so I can compare it to the other dungeons. And I found some gameplay where there's some stuff going on, there's actually some enemies I'm fighting, and I used that as a reference point. I will not mention this again since I'm going to use this technique in both the Nest and the Parasites. And by doing so, in some of the most interesting gameplay, I gained about 2 fame in 2 minutes. That is 18 total fame in 6 minutes and 50 seconds the Shatters took. Even if you hit some really big chunks of enemies, you'll still not get above 25 fame. So in conclusion, don't do Shatters for fame. It's disqualified. And I don't need a second run to conclude that. So for the heroic Undead Lair, it was a bit different. First I tried popping an ink on an Undead Lair portal. Then went into a closed realm and I got disconnected and checked REWORKS and it didn't say anything about a portal appearing after Oryx 2. So I'll be borrowing some footage from YouTube. And as soon as I found videos of people clearing the dungeon and not just rushing it with a rogue, they didn't even show the fame in the UI. Luckily I saw in Glyph's video that it actually shows to be very useful since he had the XP gain turned on. So I figured that I would use one single room because there was only one room that I could use as a reference point to the rest of the dungeon. I will use that single room as the measurement. So I multiplied together the total XP that he gained from that single room, amassed up to 3,600 XP. And from another video I found of someone rushing the dungeon, I saw that there were 9 rooms to the boss room. You do the math, it's 32,400 XP. That is 16 fame. The henchman on the boss alone gave this. And when he finally dies, that's 20 fame on top. Which means that if you were to clear every single room up until the boss point, about 37 fame, give or take. Remember, this is just an estimate, but it's to give an idea of how much fame you can actually get from this dungeon. But our unit of measure is fame per 5th minute. It took about 17 to 21 seconds for Gleph's 15 people group to clear one single room. I'll go with 20 since it's easier to work with. So 20 seconds is 1.8 fame, which means that you can divide 5 minutes up into 15 sections, with one section being 1.8 fame. And I know when you might be following along, this is really simple math, and it ends up being 27 fame in 5 minutes. So that's definitely a candidate for it. So second off, we already got the numbers for the wine cellar run. We just gotta get the time for it. So I finally found a realm that was closing, and I managed to gather up a tiny group of less than 10 people, and we defeated Oryx 2, and we finished at a time of 6 minutes and 20 seconds. It could have easily been done in 5, but let's stick with the time that I got. That makes it up to 19.7 base fame per 5th minute. Second to last dungeon, before the Lost Holes, is the Parasite Chambers. First thing I did was finding a solo clearance of the way to the boss, thanks to Thelvix for the footage. It took him about 7 minutes to clear the dungeon. Let's remove 20 seconds because he was typing with someone, and he went up with 29 fame. This means that this way was more efficient of a wine cellar with multiple people, and he was doing the parasite by himself. But of course we also need some data from a group dungeon. And yet again, Gleph seems to be able to save the day, because he's on a ninja in a group in a parasite with just above 218 fame. And it showed notably progress. He did the parasites in 5 minutes and 42 seconds and gained 38 fame. That is 33.3 base fame per 5 minutes. But I still think that the best dungeon is yet to come. The nest is coming up. I heard a raid leader say it once, that the nest is the most efficient way of fame because they're so quick to do, and the boss gives so much fame compared to the time that it takes to do the dungeon. So the first thing to do is of course look at a speedrun for Marble Co-Hunters. For some reason Linky didn't get fame from the boss when it died. I don't know, some kind of glitch. But if he would have went from 495 to 526 fame in 1 minute and 35 seconds. If you were to do nests at this rate, you would have 97.8 base fame per 5 minutes. That would only be if you kept doing them constantly right after each other, but that's insane. The beekeeper himself gives 7 fame, so if you can manage to do him also, I mean, it's a huge boost. BTL also did a full clearance of the whole dungeon, and he came up with this result. He actually only got 44 fame, but that was because back then, the main boss only gave you 4 fame instead of the 25 that we have now. You might ask yourselves, why don't you just do the dungeon yourself? And quite frankly, I just can't gather the perfect group to do this. And I don't have the nest key myself. After an estimate from Marcus RotMG's video, I can see that a normal nest of a normal group of people takes around 5 minutes and 50 seconds. Hold up, that was when the nest was released. We're much quicker now. Let's say 3 minutes. That's my solid guess on previous experience, and 61.6 doesn't seem that wrong. Now you might be curious, what has the Lost Holes to offer? The first run went pretty wrong, but I still got some footage. I gained 8 fame in 1 minute. That's about 40 every 5th minute. That's pretty good. And that's even without calculating the boss within. I also did a measurement in the cultist hideout to see if you gain more fame there than you do in the main Lost Holes. I gained 5 fame in 39 seconds. That's 38.4 in the cultist hideout. I sadly didn't get to see how much total fame I would have gotten if I finished the boss. I can calculate it, but I almost fucking died. On the boss fight itself, you get 19 fame, which is 24 fame and 30 total base fame per 5th minute, yada yada yada. We all know that the most efficient way is of course not the cultist hideout, but the Marble Colossus. Here I got some better footage than the one that I did earlier on the cultist run, and I noticed that I gained 25 fame in 2 minutes. And that was a basic, completely normal run. That is 67.5 base fame per 5th minute. And please bear in mind, this is pure minions. This is no bosses included. Because when the 5 minutes pass by, you might already have gotten to the Marble Defender. That is one of the reasons why it's so irritating to try to estimate this, because you never know what enemies you're gonna bump into, how quick you're gonna find the Marble Defender. Either way, I went on 2 raids to figure it out. So the first run clocked in at around 13 minutes and 49 seconds. Normally it takes around 10 minutes, so it's relatively slow. 127 fame was gained. That's only around 45.9 per each 5th minute. But that is with calculating the boss fights in, where you gain no fame. In the holes, we defeated the Marble Defender in exactly 5 minutes, and I gained 47 fame in that time. In the last 8 minutes and 49 seconds, I got the fame from the 2 bosses, which is 80 total fame. Not that impressive overall. So I of course had to do a second run, and this one was quicker. It was 13 minutes and 7 seconds. I gained about 105 fame. Not that good of a time overall, but I wanted to include a speed run. So I did. MCH did it really fast. But they had to skip some minions on the way, so they only acquired about 82 fame. And they really bumped up the average. So the average of all that is about 46 fame per 5th minute. The most effective way of doing the Lost Halls for the fame is actually just going in there for the minions and then leaving. But overall, the Lost Halls is just the most worth of doing because you get a lot of fame and you also get really good loot. Sometimes if you're lucky, you find the Marble Defender in about 1 minute. And there's much more potential in killing all the minions because they give so much fame. So I think we could actually start a fame train in Lost Halls and just clear the whole dungeon to get fame. Because that is the most efficient way, since you don't have to buy a key every single time like you have to do with the nest. But I have to leave it to the statistics to conclude how this video's outcome is. So here's a total overview of all the top dungeons. First dungeon to reveal is the Shatters. It's definitely not worth the risk and the fame that you get from it. Only 13.17. Tribute to the Vine Cellar for giving a decent amount of fame, and also being the best one for the beginners. The heroic Undead Lair gives a decent amount of fame, but it's not worth clearing the dungeon just for the fame, since the monsters are pretty fucking dangerous and you don't have a pet. But feel free to do it, and that number might be higher. If you seek it out and clear out the dungeon, this might be above the next one, which is the Parasite Chambers. The Nightmare Colony alone makes the Oryx Madguard Mayhem a really good dungeon for fame. I probably should have included it, but since it's so rare, I decided not to. And as expected, the Lost Halls is second. If we started doing Lost Halls for the fame, and we started arranging fame trains where we would go around and clear the whole dungeon, you would get massive amounts of fame in a short amount of time. And it's only one key, compared to the tens of keys you need to at least be able to compare the Lost Halls to the nest. We should maybe start a fame train Discord. I don't know. Top pick is of course the nest. Please bear in mind that on Lost Halls and the nest total, I averaged it out. If there's a nest event that comes on the weekend and you need some quick fame, I can recommend you doing nests. And that's why the nest takes the crown. Did you like this video? Did you find it informative? Was I talking too much about numbers, or did I certainly make a mistake? This is where the normal YouTuber asks for feedback. But I'm not a normal YouTuber. So there's not much to say, but... I just hit a lick, put them bears on my wrist, yo.